I wonder, what do people see when they look at you? I wonder, what does God see when he looks at you? King Saul looked like a king. He was tall, he was strong, he was powerful. It was pretty easy for the people to believe that he was their king. But as we know, Saul had lost his connection with God. He had fallen away. He had learned to trust in his own strength and lean on his own wisdom. So Samuel, still a priest and prophet of God, still the spiritual leader of Israel, was called on by God to find a new king. And this king would be different than Saul. God sent Samuel to the town of Bethlehem. Maybe you've heard of Bethlehem. God told Samuel that he would find the next king of Israel in that little town of Bethlehem. Now Samuel was concerned. What would he tell the people? What if Saul knew what he was doing? Would Saul attack him? Would Saul become violent? Saul had fallen so far from God, Samuel didn't know what he would do. But God told Samuel to go to Bethlehem for the purpose of making a sacrifice, but also to meet and anoint Israel's next king, the one who would become their greatest king. So Samuel came to the city of Bethlehem, and he brought an animal to sacrifice, and he prepared an altar there in the city. Samuel told the people that he was going to offer a sacrifice. He invited them to purify themselves, to bring themselves out, to participate in what he was doing. And so Samuel prepared the altar and offered the sacrifice. And he invited Jesse, who God had told him was the father of Israel's next king. And then Jesse began to introduce his sons to Samuel. He started, of course, with his oldest son. His oldest son's name was Eliab. And when Eliab was presented to Samuel, Samuel thought, oh, this man looks like a king. He was the oldest and the strongest, the biggest, the most experienced. But God told Samuel that this was not the king. God said to Samuel, men look at the outside, but God looks at the inside. And God had chosen a different looking man to be his king this time. It wasn't Eliab. Would it be Abinadab? He looked the part, but God said no. Would it be Shammah, his third son? No. His fourth son? No. His fifth son? No. Again, no. His sixth son? His seventh son? All of these 7 sons were brought by Jesse, so Samuel could see if they would be the next king. And every time, God spoke to Samuel and said no. Finally, Samuel asked Jesse, "Are these all of your sons? Do you not have another son?" Jesse said, "Well, I do have one more son, my youngest, David. But he's not here. I had left him to watch over the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down to eat until he comes back." So one of Jesse's sons was sent, and he called for David. I imagine this son had to stay back with the sheep. And David hurried into town. Young David hurried into Bethlehem and came before Samuel. He was a handsome young man, but he was young, and he was smaller than his brothers. But God looked at him. Samuel looked at him, and God told Samuel that this is the one. Samuel took the horn of oil and he anointed David. And so David's family knew that he would be the next king of Israel, though Saul was still acting as the king in those days. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And then Samuel went back to Ramah. I wonder what David felt like on this day when he was told that he would be king, when he was anointed by Samuel, the man of God. I wonder how David's father felt about this. And I wonder how David's brothers felt about their little brother, who Samuel said God had chosen to be their king. Again, I wonder, what do people see when they look at David? It was something different than what God saw. God saw much more when he looked at David. Again, I wonder, what do people see when they look at you? Does it match up with what God sees? I wonder what God sees when he looks at you. I bet it's a lot more than what some other people see. It wouldn't surprise me to know that God sees more when he looks at you than you even see in yourself. This week, I want you to ask God what he sees in you. And I pray that you can learn to see even as I learn to see all of what God sees in you and me and in all of our friends. Have a blessed week.